Okay, hi everyone. We are talking about FDME version 11.1.2.4.200 is the latest patch. We'll also talk about the new features which are included in .200 patch. So these are the goals of the course. After completing the course, you should be able to define system, application, and user profiles. We are going to do that in the next lesson. We'll perform integration tasks, create import formats and for file systems. That we'll be doing in chapter 3. Chapter number 4 is creating locations, periods and category mappings. Lesson number 5 is creating member mappings. It says member mappings here, but it's not, but it actually should be data load mappings. So we'll talk about the data load mappings in chapter 5. Chapter 6 and 7, it's going to be about data load rules and defining the data load rules and executing them in the data load workbench. Chapter 8, we're going to talk about check rules and check entities. Next lesson, we'll be talking about processing batches and managing the reports. Chapter number 11, we are going to talk about the security. We set up security in shared services like other products of IPRN, like where we do it in SBS or planning or HFM. Even FDME, we set up the security using shared services. We are also going to talk about scripts. So basically there are three types of scripts. We have import scripts, mapping scripts, and event scripts. Last chapter, we describe about FDME integration with other source systems. So the whole course would be integrating with we'll talk about file systems and open interface. In the last lesson, we'll talk about how do you integrate with other source systems as such. Okay, so if someone asks you why did you bought FDME or why your management decided to that FDME is a great product. So one of the reason is uh, why people would use FDME is to integrate metadata and data from ERP source to our EPM target system. That is one of the main reason. We can also integrate data from other sources such as open interface tables and files into EPM target applications. The other main advantage of using FDME is a drill through from target applications to view your source data. Um, we can also write back the budget data from the target applications to the source applications. So these are some of the main features of FDME. This slide talks about FDME integration. So here it shows the ERP source systems. You have EBS General Ledger. It supports Fusion General Ledger, PeopleSoft, SAP, JD Edwards, Open Interface Tables, Files, and Excel. We'll be talking about files. We also have Excel given here. So we can also download Excel where you can put the data and you can also upload them. We'll also talk about how can you do that. There are other source systems which are also supported with .200 patch. I will also show you what are the other source systems which are supported when you apply this .200 patch. So you also have ODI which is installed when you when you install FDME. ODI is also installed on top of it. So ODI sits on top of ODI and it coordinates the movement of metadata and data into EPM applications. So as I said, when you install FDME, it also installs ODI behind the scenes. The installer also configures the ODI master repository and work repository and ODI agent as a part of the install process. The ODI agent or the repository which is used by FDME cannot be used for any other purpose. So any other ODI work needs to use a separate agent and a repository. You only need to configure ODI when your data is when you load the data from a source other than a file. Only then we use ODI. So you also have a staging table. So all things that you do in FDME, it basically goes into a FDME staging table. And these are all the EPM target applications it supports. It supports HFM, Account Reconciliation Manager, Planning, as well as SBS. So accessing FDME. So to access FDME, we basically log into the workspace, then we go to navigate, administer and data management. So when you click on this data management, it shows two tabs. You have something called workflow tab and you also have something called setup tab. So in the workflow tab and setup tab, we would not be covering metadata rule because we are not loading the metadata, so I'll not be able to show what is metadata as such. We'll also not cover about logic group from the workflow. We'd also not able to cover write back facilities like write back workbench or write back rule or write back mapping. So these are all the things that are not covered as a part of the course. So in the setup tab, I would be covering all the things which are there in the setup tab. So let's log into FDMEE first, and then the first thing that we do is we log into workspace. I go to administer, I go to data management, then I go to setup tab, and I do the system settings first, then we'll proceed further. Okay, so let me log into FDME by logging into workspace. Have started the services, so I've started the FDME service. So I log into workspace. So this is the workspace screen. So I've logged into workspace. To log into FDME screen, I go to navigate, administer. I go to data management tab here. It would open two tabs. You would be able to see something called workflow, and you have something called setup tab here. The first thing that you do is that I go to setup tab. So when you first install FDME, it does not have the directory structure because it does not really know where would you want to place the data files that you are going to load. So I go to system settings, setup tab. Now the first thing I do is I go to these under configure. I go to system settings. There are four types of profiles. You have file, POV, ODI, other, and all. I go to file here. Now I tell to the system where to create the folder structure. So I give a name called training FDME. Save it. Hit saved and you say create application folders. Now when you click on this create application folders, it is going to create a training FDME folder in the backend. So I go and click on create application folders. So it has successfully created application folders. Now I minimize this. I go to backend. Now I go to C drive and it has created a folder called training FDME. So when you click on this, it has created three folders. You have got a data folder, inbox and outbox. Data folder, this is going to have a scripts, and this will also contain archive version of any data file that you load. So you basically have scripts. So when you talk about import scripts, event scripts and custom scripts, so so all the scripts would be saved in this folder. So when you go to inbox folder, so you click on inbox, it also have the archived version of your files. So it also contains when you create locations, so it also creates a folder in the backend. The locations that we create with some name, it is going to create locations as the folders in the backend. So basically locations are used for security purpose. So we'll talk about location based security in the later chapters. So it creates these folders in the backend when you under system settings you do something here. So I go to setup tab. So I've created the folders. So there is something called create location folder. So I basically, there are only two settings that I can give, either yes or no. So generally it would be, we give it S here. So when you give an S here, it means that it is going to create a folder, which means that it is going to create a folder in the backend in the outbox folder. So when you create a folder with the name called Texas, it is going to create a folder in the backend with the name called Texas. So when you create a location, so when you create a location with the name called Texas, it is going to create a folder in the backend with the name called Texas. In the same way, if you are going to create a location with the name called Georgia, it is going to create a folder in the backend with the name Georgia. So it is always recommended that you keep this setting as yes here. We only have two settings, either yes or no. Click on yes. And we have archive mode. So there are three settings here. We can either have copy, move, or none. By default, this copy. You can either choose any one of these, either copy, move, or none. So basically, I keep it as default as copy. So it is going to create the archived version of your files would be copied to a different location that we'll see it later. So it is something called exclude file upload with wild characters. If there are any wild character cards that you don't want to recognize, that you tell to the system that do not recognize these wild cards, so it will ignore. Now say for example, I can tell to the system that to exclude .exe file or star dot cmd or star dot bat. So it's going to exclude all these format of files. There is something called batch size. The batch size setting controls how the application holds data rows in memory before committing them to the database during the import stage. This setting is a function of the amount of memory, that is RAM, as well as the number of concurrent users expected. The optimal level is the one that will be found through extensive testing and refinement. A good start would be anywhere between 1000 and 500 records. By default it is 1000, so I would set it as to 1000. File character set, so by default I set it to UTF-8. If you want, you can select, there are other character sets that you can choose from. So you have something called encrypt password. The encrypted password folder setting is used to specify the directory where the file with encrypted password is stored. This file is created by encrypted password utility, which is there in the backend. So I go to middleware, EPM system 11 R1, products, financial data quality. In the bin folder, you have a utility called encrypt password utility. You can also use this. So for additional information, you can also look at the FDMEE admin guide. So these are the settings under the profile type file. So which means that if you're um, if you're setting an options at the system level, the assumption is that these options are the same for every target applications. So if you want to override these settings, so you can also go to application settings to override some of the settings which are, say, I don't want to use it from my system settings, so I can also set it at my application settings. Okay, I click on, from the file you click on POV, which is called point of view. The point of view profile, we cannot set this because we don't have location set, and once we define locations we'll be able to set the default location that would default when you go to the data load screen. So I would leave it blank as of now here. So when you create locations and I would come down to this screen again, then I would set what is my default point of view. I click on ODI, so there is nothing much to do in the ODI settings here. Just click on check ODI connections. Click OK. You have the other profile type. The other profile type, the main thing here is to set the log level. So we have 5 different types of log levels. One is the least, and 5 is the most information. So we set it to the log level 4 here. So if you want, you can set it to 5, but it is recommended that you set it to 4 here. The other setting that we see here, So the enable event script execution, this should we set it to yes, um, and we'll talk about this later. This should be set to yes, or else the script will not execute. So that is the reason we set it to yes. And I don't see any other settings which are important here. I click on all. It's showing me all the settings that you have set. Click on save. Now I go to my source systems and I register my source systems. In this case study, so we'll be using planning as my source systems. I go to source system here and I register my source system. I click on add. So I go to my target system and my target system should be planning. I click on my target system here. Click on add. So you are able to see something called local and cloud. The reason being that, so I have applied .200 patch, and this is the new feature. When you install .200 patch, you can also register your target application which is in cloud. For example, if you're using planning, which is PBCS, you can also register your cloud-based applications. You can also enable your DRM to manage your metadata through FDME. You can also enable DRM here. I click on local. So from the drop down, so these are all the target systems which it supports. So I click on planning here. Now it takes some time to display all my planning applications. So I have my Finbird planning application that I have created. So I would register this target application. Click OK. So once you registered the target application, and once we do that, it will automatically locate the definition of the target application, and it will find all the dimensions that it has. So it has all the applications. I have created this application using EPMA. So that's the reason that deployment mode is EPMA. If you have deployed this application using Classic, then you would see an option called Classic here. So you have all the dimensions here. You have year, version, customer service underscore class, scenario, period, customer, entity, currency, and account. And it also identifies what dimension it has. So, and also, okay, so year version is my version dimension. Sorry, this is my year, this is my version, this is my smart list. You have scenario, period. Customer is my generic application. So it is generic here. Entity is entity, currency, and account is account. So I click on defining the application options here. So these are some of the options which are specific to this Finbird application. So if you want to set any application, so if you do not set any settings here, it assumes that it will take all your settings from your system settings here. So I would leave them blank. I do not change anything. I click on save. I go to my source system. So these are the different source systems it supports. So apart from by default is selected as file, but it supports all these source systems. So we have installed .200 patch. So we have got some additional source systems it supports. ODI context code, leave it to global here. Click on save.